The recent European elections and indeed campaigns carried out all across the continent have raised quite a big question about what course the European Union and Europe should take in the near future. With all the challenges and threats, it seems to be quite an essential question indeed. And a large part of the answer actually lies in the hands of young electorates, the young people who are extremely critical about the world in which they just come in as adults. Many of them want to make a change, and many of them see the opportunity for the change in the far-right radicalism and populism. What does it tell us about the future, and is this a full picture? We're now joined by three Polish young people and Polish students living in three different countries, studying at three different universities, and drawing from very, very different backgrounds as well, and who've come here to Sobot to talk about the future of the European Union. Thanks for joining us here at TVP World. Klau Chmielowska, graduate of Oxford University. Hello. Now living in the UK. Kacper Staroszczyk, University of St. Gallen, from Switzerland, as of now. And Wiktor Babinski, PhD student at Yale University in the United States. Welcome to all of you. By the way, none of you live in an EU member state, at least most of your time. So perhaps you look at it from a bit of a distance. So, right, let's start about the European elections. So what do you, just freshly in the news, the results of the European elections, what do you make of them?
So yesterday when I was catching up with the sort of mainstream commentary about the recent European elections, what struck me was sort of the narrative that the far-right movements and
are gaining power.
Are gaining power indeed, yes. However, when I then tried to reconcile this with the actual results, which translated into the seats to the European Parliament, which is indeed the most important thing, in the end, the trend is not that visible, actually. So, meaning that the far-right parties, they increased their seats only by a few percentage points to nearly 19 or so, which sort of that was my first takeaway when I was just trying to reconcile the general narrative.
So you think that the general narrative, okay, the far-right is growing in power, it's a bit of an exaggeration in your opinion, is it?
Indeed, yes, especially in the mainstream commentary. The trend is indisputable across the Europe. Don't get me wrong.
But the wave is not as strong as it might have been.
Exactly, exactly. And as well, the commentary, I think, a little bit exaggerates the actual results.
Perhaps some people are trying to sort of sound the alarm of the things that might happen in the future. Yes, the trend is actually
very well
clear. Klau.
I agree fully. I think this is a bit of fear-mongering. I've seen something similar both when I was reading through the popular media, but also social media. A lot of my friends, I used to live in France, in Paris, so clearly there was a lot of response. A lot of my friends were making very strong comments about this is the end of the world, this is the end of the country.
Well, we've heard that many a time, even here at the Congress, I remember a few years ago. Yes, the European Union is going to disintegrate completely within the next 10 years or so. It's never happened, not yet.
But I think it's a bit, again, exaggerated. And I think it's also that what leads to more polarization or radicalization on the political stage, because of this like us versus them debate, or like, oh, we are losing power, who's going to come and take the power now? Like, we can discuss. At the end of the day, it's, as Kacper said, it's small difference. It's still going to be discussed within the European Parliament. We'll be able to see how this develops. It's not like we lost the reins of power, we don't really know what's going to happen next. And I think this narrative is really dangerous for more changes like this to happen in the future, for even less dialogue to happen.
Victor, are you worried, or do you think it's an exaggeration?
Well, it's certainly not the end of the world, but the trend is real. The right wing is certainly gaining popularity across Europe and in America.
This is what you observe every day.
I do. And we need to get to the bottom of the issues that drive this growth. Clearly, there is one across the spectrum. And I think the major one that can connect all of those parties and movements is immigration. And the message that we should get, probably, not only here in Europe, but also in the United States, is that migration and border security matters. And if the liberals and centrists are unwilling to enforce borders, the people will elect somebody else who will.
Yeah.
Would you agree that it's the main issue, it's the central issue that we should take into consideration if we want to stay united as Europe? Because we know about migrations, one thing for certain. There are many question marks, but one thing is for certain. It is going to grow rather than decline.
Let me just add one more thing to this. I think the case of Poland is actually very interesting because it shows you that liberal and centrist-leaning parties that are in power can still embrace a line of border security and enforcing the border, especially when faced with an aggressive operation from an enemy state on the east, and still hold on to power. In Poland, the Civic Coalition has, in fact, won the elections.
Yeah, okay. What, in your opinion, what should we do about migrations?
I'm not sure whether I fully agree with Victor's point on that front. I think like the discussion about immigration, it is one of the central reasons behind the changes we're seeing. But I think it's discussion about like how it's being perceived. So, for example, the
narrative rather than
the narrative rather than the actual facts. Exactly. And I think a lot of times for people who been citizens of a country for many years, they see immigrants coming over, and there's this narrative about receiving benefits that were probably like perhaps unwarranted or even undeserving, basically. And I think I agree to a large extent that this is to what extent like the central leftist part of the political debate doesn't really want to acknowledge or discuss. And I think that kind of leads to even more myths and more misconceptions and more division. But I'm not sure exactly whether it's that the enforcing security control is the force that I would put forward there.
Yeah. Well, we put
one thought I had in mind about the what you have said, Victor, is that this is the intrinsic need of everyone just to feel safe and secure.
Yeah.
And right
it's a need
now,
number one, basically.
Exactly.
For society, for individuals, for everybody.
This is the very bottom of the Maslow's pyramid.
Yeah.
And this has to be addressed somehow. Looking back 30 years, we have been enjoying, as Europe, really beautiful geopolitical weather. Now it's changing. So the rest and what people feel is absolutely understandable.
Yeah. Well, you said it has to be resolved somehow. Well,
exactly. It
how?
has to be. Well, we can brainstorm about it. Probably we have a.
That's why you've come here to talk about it. Well, you're the best brains in Europe and actually across the Atlantic as well. So I'm just putting you the question to you.
With no pressure, right?
no.
Let's solve. Yeah, through you great brains here. Well, how to solve the immigration crisis? I think, sort of looking inwardly, looking at Europe, I think the absolute key thing is that we should have a united voice about this issue. There has to be really no or minimal disagreement about how to deal with it, and only then we can...
United in the sense of Europe, yeah? Being united and...
The voice. In terms of the administrative details, we will talk about this in the debate, in 2 days.
Victor's actually quite correct, I think, that we do need unity. But look, with even if it's a narrative kind of thing about the growing right wing in the European Parliament, probably the narrative would make this unity somehow fall apart rather than strengthen. That's what my worry is about the next European Parliament. Would you agree?
But this is the very essence of democracy, that we have different voices. Only in different how different states are run, you can have only one voice, and we definitely don't want to live in one. The essence of democracy is that we have multiple voices, and that's what enriches the democracy and makes it survive for such a long time.
In response to both of you, I don't think we're actually... It's not about migration as such. It's about border security. We can discuss migration. We can have legal migration. We can have a debate about this. But what we're seeing right now, both in Europe and in the United States, is a question of people flowing in an uncontrolled manner through the southern border in the United States,
through Mexico,
through Mexico, through Belarus, through the Mediterranean, and that I think is something we should all agree on. It shouldn't be a populist position that borders ought to be secure, and then we can have a discussion about migration and about refugees and about asylum seekers.
Right.
In order to do that, we have to secure the border.
Let's talk a little bit about your generation and younger generations. Maybe you'll be able to explain a bit more of that to me. Young voters, I'm talking about obviously those active young people who voted in the previous elections, 2019, they actually then brought what we called a green wave, lots of focus on climate politics and so on and so forth. Now the momentum seems completely different with the young people, really, that many of them have become, for some reason, and I'm asking about this reason, extremely Eurosceptic. And this group is frightfully growing, as a matter of fact. Would you agree?
I don't think it's the same group at the end of the day. I think there are different groups that were activated at different times in different elections, more than is people change their mind completely from one end to the other end of the spectrum. I think before, in 2019, we had this conversation about the right of Trump basically in the US. There's a bit more discussion of anyone who's kind of on the liberal side needs to go and vote and make a change. Whereas I think now, for example, in Poland, after the October elections, I think the bit of this wave was down. It was kind of this sense of security that.
So I think that this leftish climate, let's call it in inverted commas, group has sort of deactivated itself, and the one that's Eurosceptic and questioning the integrity of the European Union is actually getting activated.
Yeah, and I think also the discussion on the kind of the left part of the spectrum, especially for the young voters, is also about what's happening in Gaza and with Israel. The attention is a bit away from Europe and what's happening here, and there's a much kind of bigger general conversation about what's happening in the world and how we can address that. And I think this not necessarily distracts, but diverts the attention. And I think that's a different group that kind of was more alarmed and activated to make changes now. Because again, the turnout is very low. I don't think we're talking about exactly the same group. It's not like the 80% of people, voted one way and then they all changed. We're talking about very, very small numbers in the day.
That's true.
I think Klaus is exactly right here. So when you look at the turnout, it's quite low. And what your hypothesis would have been right if the turnout was 100%, and therefore we could state that the preferences have
By the way,
switched.
why do you think it's so low? People don't care? People don't believe in democracy? People don't believe in Europe?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. Probably one reason could be that young people feel sort of disillusioned with how they are represented, or maybe sometimes misrepresented. Yes. Maybe they are just fed up with some politicians changing their minds, and therefore they don't believe that their vote, they are not exactly sure for what they're voting, because the term is 4 years long. And if politicians change their mind multiple times within that time frame, it might lead to some disengagement.
Victor, any ideas?
As for Euroscepticism,
from your point of view, from across the Atlantic?
As for Euroscepticism, I'm not sure that any of the major populist movements in Europe now openly question their country's membership in the European Union, or that want to take it out of the European Union. It's probably more about changing what the European Union is ideologically, in terms of policies, in terms of what it means to its citizens. So I would actually advise us to maybe revise what Euroscepticism means.
Okay.
Because it's not like every so-called populist movement right now gaining ground
necessarily
in Europe is necessarily for exiting the European.
I think Victor touched on a really important point, because skeptics are very important to make things better, to improve things, because they point out where the problems lie. And without this diagnosis, we can't improve. And we really want and need to improve how things work now, especially during this dangerous geopolitical situation that we are entering, this new era.
And this danger of the geopolitical situation that you have mentioned also comes from the word that we've mentioned quite a few times. I remember Klaus saying at least twice about narrative, that things perhaps look different and real than we see them or perceive them because of the narrative. And who's in charge of the narrative to a great extent? All around the world, really. It's basically Russia, isn't it? Especially in social media. They've been extremely active for many, many years. And that applies to your generation and the younger generation, who's very much relying on whatever they read in social media. We are sort of lagging behind in terms of this information war. Did you have any? Well, would you agree with that or not? Because I'm asking, what can we do about it to actually be able to confront this front line of disinformation war, moderated by Russia, as a matter of fact?
I mean, I see your point, but I think it's kind of takes away from our accountability if we just say it's always Russia discussing or like what's happening on social media and it's setting up the course for narrative.
But to a great extent it is, isn't it?
Yeah, but we also have
Look
a role
at
in
Brexit,
this, basically.
look at Trump.
We discussed at the beginning about like media, what's happening with media being like this fear-mongering about like the far right is taking power. I think like we also, like media basically, traditional and social media as well, have a big role in shaping narrative. From the perspective of young people, we are very good at fact-checking, surprisingly, and in navigating basically
Well, perhaps your group, but is it really the case? I mean, fact-checking is one of the problems I would.
But I would say, like, I think, I don't know whether you two would agree, but I think generally, since like growing up with like internet and knowing, kind of understanding like the possible dangers of it, I think generally we're quite skeptical on what's happening basically on social media and in the media. Like a lot of my friends, myself included, like the way that we consume media is try to go through multiple different sources and outlets to be able to find a balanced opinion.
Okay.
So I think we all have.
What about if you get out of your university bubble and intellectual bubble? Would you find it the same process going on?
I think the internet part, the fact-checking one, I would hope so at least.
I would love this answer to be true. I hope it is true, as a matter of fact. I would like it to be true.
Yeah, I mean, I think the undisputable fact is that we live in a brave new world where we just learn how to swim in these uncharted waters. So I think there are no clear guidance.
And
yeah, it's just difficult, and we learn as we go. Sort of, we learn how to ride a bicycle when we're already riding it downhill, full speed ahead, with some obstacles in front of us.
Somebody was
This
a
is a
bit late
situation.
to see the hill.
Correct, absolutely true. So, but I can only sort of state that I hope that again it's the case in our generation. Not sure whether it is.
Okay, but is there anything that we can do about it, really? I mean, look, Brexit, to a large extent, was moderated by Russian propaganda, yeah? Trump was actually, to a large extent, in his previous elections, moderated by Russian propaganda. We do have evidence of Russia meddling with European politics, and probably we're actually consuming the results at the moment. Is that not your real, tangible fear?
I will disagree with you, but first I need to agree with you.
A very complicated rhetoric.
Right. The propaganda machine that Russia has that is aimed at polarizing and dividing us is probably the best investment they've ever made in their war on the West. We might think we're not in the war against Russia, but Russia is definitely at war with us.
Okay.
And much better investment than tanks in Ukraine could ever be. And so it is true that they are working to divide us, but perhaps the answer is not to overly dramatize this and panic about Russian influence, because then we draw attention away from the real issues. In the United States, after Trump was elected, there was for many months a huge political argument about whether or not and to what extent Russia has influenced the result of the election.
Correct.
The result
We do have reports about that.
the result of it was that 50% of the population accepted it as a dogma, and 50% rejected it.
Okay.
It brings us nowhere to dramatize Russian influence. We should deal with the issues that the Russian propaganda machine is playing on. It's not that they have mind control over us. They are using real issues such as migration, such as job security to divide and polarize us. We should focus on the issues and not on the supposed Russian influence, which is certainly true, in order to defeat it.
All right, back to Europe and back to Poland a bit. Donald Tusk yesterday, after hearing the election results, said that Poland is now sort of beacon of hope for the rest of Europe. Indeed, populist forces lost power in the last parliamentary elections in Poland. This time, they won again on a tiny margin, but still they did win yesterday at the election. Do you think that Poland can actually offer a real, tangible leadership to the rest of Europe that is going through political crisis? Look at France with new elections just coming up in a few days, with Germany that is undergoing a serious political crisis. So what can Poland offer to the rest of Europe, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think we discussed the narrative part before, and I think like the whole thing there is about the unity of like, not I think the whole EU as a bloc, but like what's happening in individual countries. We discuss migrations and all of the kind of things. I think if Poland can show the leadership, or rather than saying, we won, you lost, that's why we should look into like our case study. But instead focus on creating a dialogue. I mean, at the end of the day, we're currently in Sopot. We're very close to the place when Poland actually led a lot of movements that started with open dialogue.
Yes,
and I
it started in 1809 with the historic victory of Solidarity.
For the first time, I went to the Museum of Solidarity like 2 days ago, and I was really moved by like how big of a role Poland had. Like I knew it before, but like it was very different to see.
Is this going to repeat? You think? Is this going to sort of repeat this historic moment?
I'm not sure, but I think that's what I'm saying. We have accountability right now, especially with the results that they're coming over, like to show that like we can figure out the unity within the country.
Okay.
I was in the UK when Brexit vote happened. I recently been living also in France, so I'm quite excited to see when I go back from here.
So you have a good comparison.
So I have a good comparison. I think what I've been seeing is this very strong sense of division and like just groups of people who are before even neighbors who don't talk to each other. They look at the media and they don't talk.
That's quite notorious in Poland as well.
Yeah, but we have a chance to do it better, and I think that's where like our leadership could be useful, rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, we are just the most liberal. That's why you should listen to us."
Are you with Clau on that?
Well, I'm with Clau on the fact, or sort of, I'm sharing the opinion that I'm a big believer in that Poland can indeed be a beacon of hope and a true leader, because we have this really tremendous opportunity now, which we should use to position our country as a beacon of low polarization, if we can deliver on that, especially given this special geopolitical situation.
Although the polarization in Poland is actually quite high.
That's true, but I think what we should do, because your question is what Poland should do, if we manage not to discuss the elections sort of too much, but take it. I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, and they really don't. They try not to focus on the past, but really think about the present and future, what we can do. Actionable ideas here.
So is your Stoic point of view accepting the fact that we might, I'm not changing the subject completely now, that we actually might have a war spreading in Europe further than Ukraine? Would you believe that is possible?
I think this is a possibility that we should definitely entertain for this not to happen.
Okay. A very diplomatic answer. All right, Victor.
Well, whether you see it as a beacon of hope, I suppose, is a question of our political allegiance, but Poland is certainly now further along the populist versus liberal cycle than most other countries in the world. We have already had 2 terms of a classically populist government, and now we have seen its defeat and the establishment of, some could say, a liberal counter-revolution. I think whether Poland can be presented as a beacon of hope to the world depends on how we and our political class manages to go forward now.
But do we stand a good chance?
We have a good chance. We have a good chance.
Is a window of opportunity open now?
There is, if we normalize it. If we close this revolutionary cycle of fighting over institutions and manage to create a decent and normalized political scene where populists toggle for power with the liberals without destroying institutions, and definitely we will have.
These are high hopes, Victor, I'm afraid.
The first country in the world to do that.
But I think Victor said a very important thing. He used the word cycle, and I think that's what kind of we're missing with all this discussion we've been having. It's just that this is a cycle that we are seeing over and over
cycle
again,
of history.
basically. Well, recently, also the past like 15, 20 years, what we see in Europe, the rise of like the liberal, the populist movements. I feel like, if you were to look to the news from like 4 years ago, 8 years ago, you see very similar headlines. And I think that's the way to get out of the cycle or improve on this rather than kind of go deeper on that front.
What kind of Europe would you like to see in the future? You've come here to debate the architecture, let's call it, of the European Union. One of your arguments is, or at least questions that you're going to publicly raise tomorrow or day after tomorrow, is whether Europe should integrate more and whether it should do it in the style of a federation like the United States. In other words, whether we should become the United States of Europe.
Europe of my dreams is definitely less polarized than it is today. And I don't want to go into the details about the administrative structure of it, but definitely less polarized, more united, and really embracing the diversity that we have on the continent, because this is really special. While all this,
Best
while
place
competing,
on earth, as a matter of fact.
cannot agree more. Really. And all this while embracing the challenge of competing in this concert of great powers that we will have probably in the years ahead. That's the Europe of my dreams.
As a matter of fact, we're sort of living in a bit of a pivotal moment, isn't it? Well, the European elections is just one of them, one of the pillars. Another would be your business, over the Atlantic, the American elections, and whether or not Trump will win. But it will completely change the architecture of all the main problems on this planet, including security, including growth, and the balance of power, everything.
Yeah, the military stance on NATO. I mean, the US is really the driving force behind it. And this is one of the challenges that Europe has in front of it, to really rebuild the military capabilities across the continent, not only on the east flank.
What will the world be like in a year and a half? Well, let's just go on with some dreams. There we go. Dreams and hopes. A year and a half after the elections in the United States.
I think for me, like the dream world on that front would be to kind of realize, kind of take a zoom out from what's happening within the countries, within the discussions we have on the news, and kind of think like what's happening around the world. There are obviously security risks. There are risks with climate change. There's all this kind of issues that we should think about globally, or at least regionally, to see how best we can solve them and work together to solve it, rather than kind of go deeper and deeper into polarization, argue about the things that don't matter all that much. A lot of times we're looking from a bigger perspective. So in my ideal world, it doesn't matter kind of who wins or who loses. It's kind of like how we proceed further with the dialogue and how we put the things that are actually important on a priority list and focus on those.
Victor, when you graduate from your university, Yale, in the United States, are you going to come back to Europe, or are you going to stay in the States?
Well, that's a very difficult question that I think I'll be able to answer only a few weeks ahead of graduation.
Really what do you think about it?
Depends on the job market, really, and that's a tough issue, as you know. No, but you know, my area of expertise is in Europe, of course, and most certainly in Eastern Europe, and that makes me think that my ideal world, or one when I graduate in 2 years, is one with a defeated Russia. I don't think we've talked nearly enough about this. Russia is at war with us, even if we don't want to acknowledge that, and Russia perceives Europe and the European Union as a threat that needs to be destroyed, not because of what we do, as some people would say, but because of who we are and what we represent. The thing that we represent is a mortal threat to what the Kremlin has built in Russia, and therefore they think they don't have a choice, and we definitely don't have a choice other than to fight them and to defeat Russian imperialism. And if we can do that, that would mean a much safer world, a much safer Europe, and that is my main wish for the next 2 years.
And we put a full stop here. Thank you very much indeed for this conversation. Klara Chmielowska, Kacper Staroszczyk, and Viktor Popieński. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.